This turned out to be a little bit more difficult than what I thought. And I tear up just thinking about it. It was really hard to try to find what my mom meant to me. I went off in several different directions. First, I thought about her name. Well, her name in Hebrew means house, which is fitting because my mother's house was always open to everyone. Excuse me. Hope I get this out of the way. Anyway, it got me to thinking, where she came from. I know that my parents' marriage license listed them at 20 years of age, which I thought, back in 1923, 20 was kind of old to get married. A lot of people were married younger than that. They were living in Chilton, Kentucky, in Casey County, and listed as farming. Well, my grandfather was a farmer, so that I'm assuming my other grandfather was as well, because he ended up in Plymouth, Indiana with a farm. And they were married February 25th, 1923. Then I got to wonder, what it was like 90 years ago in that population. So I looked it up. In 2013, the population in Chilton, Kentucky was 1,351 people, and the total in Casey County was 16,067, and it was a 446 square mile area. That got me to thinking another way. Well, I compared it to Indianapolis. At the same time, there's 852,866 people registered in population in 364 square miles. Kind of makes you wonder. There was a lot of space out there back in Chilton. A lot of farming country. I knew she grew up on a farm. She lost her mother when she was young. I think about 12. My grandfather remarried, and she ended up having 2 half-brothers, none of which I ever got to meet. I was born the same birth date as my grandfather, March 9th. She married my dad against her father's wishes, which back then was a pretty stubborn thing to do, so kind of guess where I got my stubbornness from. But I asked her later on, I said, why did my grandfather not want you to marry my dad? Well, it turns out he didn't think, like a lot of fathers, that my dad was good enough for my mother. But I think the main reason was he picked out an older pharmacist or druggist in town for my mother to marry, which she did not want to marry, so therefore she married my dad. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here. So, they had 8 kids, 4 boys, 4 girls. Herschel was the oldest, and he was born 9 months after their marriage. He lived to be 18 months old and died with spinal meningitis. At the time, she was pregnant with my sister Mabel, who was preemie because of that, I'm sure. And then, in succession, she ended up having, I gotta think here now. She had Mabel, then she had Lois, then she had Bill, then Johnny, and then Darlene, and Daryl, all that ranged in a 2 to 2.5 year time frame. Then I came along 3.5 years later, totally unexpected, during the change of life, which she said scared her to death, because back then was the old wives' tale, if you had a baby during the change of life, it was usually stupid. Or something mentally wrong with it, and she assured me that that was not my case, and I was very grateful for that. But I then told her when I was younger, I said, Mom, I think you and Dad were ahead of time with Planned Parenthood. Because there's 2.5 year time slot in there. Leave it to them. But anyway, and she always told me that she loved every one of her kids, which she did, and I'm sure every mother out here loves your children, no matter what they do. I know I love my kid, and he irritates the devil out of me from time to time. I always thought my mom was the greatest mom in the world, as I'm sure you all think your mother's the greatest mother there is. And they always will be. I knew she had to be strong, having married, against her father's wishes. Lost a son 18 months. No parent ever wants to do that. I don't know how she survived some of them. She raised 7 more to adulthood. Some of us turned out okay. Some of us, But I don't know how they survived the Depression. She's been gone 33 years now. But she had 3 children during the Depression. I know they lived here in Indianapolis, not far away from over here on East Street. But I could never remember at any time ever hearing any of my older brothers and sisters complain that they didn't have something to eat. And I suspect that that was probably because we were from a farming family. And I do remember people coming, from the farm, and my dad going hunting over in Illinois with uncles shooting pheasants and that. And I remember eating rabbit and squirrel and all those kind of things when we were little that most kids would not even, they snub their nose at it now. But believe me, when you're one of 8, you eat most of anything on the plate in front of you. She survived having a son in World War II. My oldest brother, living brother, Bill, was a tail gunner in a B-52 bomber. You see the movies and you wonder, that's pretty hairy. My other brother, John, was in the Marines in Vietnam. And he worked on repairing the airplanes on the ground when they came back with bullet holes and stuff in them. Fortunately, my youngest brother, Daryl, he entered the National Guard, so he didn't go over in the war. But then she went through it when my kid went into the Marines. As you can guess, we're kind of a military family. And she went through, as I did, him being in Beirut. She never did find out until he got back, nor did I, that he was ambushed and ended up being in the Navy hospital in Greece for 3 days with a concussion. But those are things that, you learn afterwards. I probably would have lived through it if I'd known it at the time, but they're just things that you do. She had a backbone of steel, as us kids were. But she was also the most gentle, loving soul. I know, Pat's sitting there shaking her head, because, can't make Kleenex. Sorry. But Pat remembers coming to my house and visiting my mother, who was a member of the Esther Circle here. She forever took care of her kids. I had a sister that was addicted to drugs way back then, and she took care of her, and we went through the mental institution out here and all of that good stuff. But as I said, they're your kids and you love them. My brother got sick in California, and we went out there. We flew him home, and he was there again. She was taking care of him and my brother. She went through cancer with my dad. We took care of him at home. So these are things that mothers do, ladies of backbone of steel. And I applaud you all for that. Okay. She was also what we called an earth mother, or at least us kids did. We had squirrels that would come into the yard, and they'd come right up the fence, and she'd stand there with those big round sugar cookies, and that squirrel would take that thing out of her hand and just sit there and spin that cookie around until it was gone. And then a week later, here she come with her baby, and the baby did the same thing the mother did. But everything gravitated to her because she was just an earth mother. The son-in-laws, I think, all married the daughters in the family because of the mother. She was their mother too, because some of them didn't have mother. But she was the most gentle soul I know. She did get angry. And of course, most of us kids swore that she had eye in the back of her head. Still think most mothers do. Or it's a sixth sense. The example was we were sitting in the house one evening in the summertime and we were watching TV, and we heard footsteps on the front porch down here at 23 Spring Street where we were living. And she jumped off the couch and said, "Johnny's home." He'd been in the war. We got up, went to the door, and there he stood. She knew his footsteps. That is a mother's internal radar for her child. And I'm sure you've all had that sixth sense that your kid's someplace, they're in trouble or they're coming home or whatever. But it's just a mother's I don't know how to explain it. It's just the love and the feel that a mother has to know where her child is at any time and what's going on in their life. She was a strict disciplinarian, thank goodness. being one of 8 and the last, naturally, if we got in trouble and nobody fessed up and she got angry, she started with the first one. And it was Mabel Renee, Lois May, William Robert, John Delbert, Darlene, Darrell, and then Rosemary. You always knew you were in trouble when she used your full name. So if nobody fessed up, we all got with it. And then whoever did it got a second one from the rest of us, naturally. But we always went out and got our switch. Well, you know, fair's fair. She would send us out in the yard to get her switch. And if we got the wrong one, we'd have to go back and get the right size, which just meant we got an extra whack or two because we didn't pick the right one first. So anyway, it was much preferable to the daddies. Daddy used to razor strap. So we'd much prefer to have moms. She always believed in going to church. My earliest remember was we lived on, I was born at 823 South 7th Street, which is directly west of Shapiro's, about 3 or 4 blocks. And back then we didn't drive to church, you know, you walked to your church or got on a streetcar. So anyway, ended up going to Presbyterian Church 3 or 4 blocks away, right on the corner of Church Street and Morris. And still to this day remember that minister's name was Bill Peterson. I don't remember some of my other ministers, but I remember him, and I remember that he was tall and skinny. She loved watching TV with ministers. And one particular pianist, you did not interrupt her when she was watching Bishop Sheen. How many of you remember Bishop Sheen? Yeah, a couple of you. Anyway, Catholic priest that had a Sunday, I forget what night it was on, but it wasn't on Saturday, Sunday night, it was one night during the week. But anyway, he used to come out with these red robes and all of this stuff on. The other one was Oral Roberts. I made the mistake one time of telling her I thought Oral Roberts was a scam artist who was out to get poor people's money. Of course, I was young and didn't know what I was talking about. And the other one was Liberace. You did not interrupt her when those shows were on TV. It was a cardinal sin. I did have the pleasure of taking my mom to see Liberace in person at the Starlight Musicals out at Butler University way back when. And he did put on a good show. She loved to have fun with her kids. I had ended up naturally with 3 older sisters. I had 3 brother-in-laws, all of which were, as I said, I think married daughters because of mother, but they would always come and say, "You want to go for a ride?" She was always ready to go. And they'd say, "Well, let's go get a watermelon." Well, they'd end up in Louisville, Kentucky. Find some place that had a cold watermelon and split it open and eat it. Or you want to go get a hamburger. And they'd, yeah, well, they'd end up in Ohio at Big Boys, having a Frisch's Big Boy. But I remember one time, I'm not sure which brother-in-law and sister it was, but I think it was Darlene, the next time I knew him. They had a convertible, and we were sitting right over here at Eastern Raymond Street on our way back home because we'd been out riding around Garfield Park and all that. And this poor old man pulled up next to the car in a motorcycle and had a sidecar on it with his wife in it. My mother had a devilish streak, and just as the light was changing, she looked over and said to this poor gentleman, "Darling, where have you been?" And this poor old man, this lady took into him, was hollering at him, and unbeknownst to mother, she had an umbrella in the sidecar with her, and she started whacking that poor old man with the umbrella as he was going east on Raymond Street. Well, we thought it was funny at the time, but it really wasn't, because I don't think that poor man knew what hit him. She was, as usual, most mothers are hardworking. I can remember when I was little, she put us in the wagon and pulled us over. My dad worked at American Can on East Street over there. And he liked to hang out with his cousins and stuff on the weekends at the local taverns, drinking and gambling. So she'd be over there when he got off work and get as much of the paycheck as she could, so she'd have rent and food and all of that good stuff. But then she'd take that wagon and put us in it, and there was a place downtown, and you could go get, they had the pull cards, tabs, and you glue these little tabs on these cards, and they'd sell them in grocery stores and taverns, I guess, or whatever. But anyway, she'd load up on those things and bring them home, and we'd sit there and we'd glue those little tabs in rows all on these cards about like that. Well, you got a penny a card. I swear to God, we did thousands and thousands of those things. But it was a way to make a few dollars to help out, you know. And then my dad, as I said, she's caring. My dad, you know, straightened up later on in my life. You know, he quit drinking when I was in probably about 6 or 7, something like that. But when he got done at American Can in the 40s, he'd come over to, anybody remember Regan's Rye?
Yeah.
That was right just south of Shapiro's. They used to bake the rye bread and all that.
I worked there.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I'll be darned. Hey, anyway, my dad would go in there after he got off work at American Can, and he'd scrub all of their baking pans and everything. Now, he didn't get any money for that, but they would give him all of the old rolls and the day-old bread and whatever was left over from that had been returned. And I can remember my dad coming home with just, well, what we call big trash bags now, but bags of rolls and stuff. And everybody in the neighborhood that had children would end up at our house, and my mother would go through all of that, and she would make sure that every child in the neighborhood had at least one item of bread to eat with their dinner that night or for breakfast the next morning. So that's kind of caring and sharing, and she did her service in a lot of ways way back then for God. We also lucked out. Excuse me, I'm going to put a candle out here somewhere. I had an uncle. Remember a huckster wagon? They called them huckster wagons. But it was just like you see in the movies where he had a donkey or mule or whatever you want to call them. And he pulled a wagon. He had fresh vegetables and fruit and stuff. And so anyway, he always ended up his route at our house in the evening, and whatever was left over that he wasn't able to sell that day, sometimes it was fit to sell, he would drop off at our house. There again, if there was enough, it was shared. Otherwise, it went into the pot, came out as a soup or whatever was available at the time. She was a marvelous cook. Anybody remember Russett's cafeteria downtown? Pat's shaking her head. She's probably the only one outside of me that does. Yeah, Linda does. Anyway, it was right across the street from L.S. Ayers, or in that same block there. And she ended up being the baker there. And she went to work because naturally my sister got sick with her addiction, and so we needed the extra funds. And then my dad was also one of those that didn't believe in girls going to school. He was the old school. He thought, well, when you got a certain age, you got married, you had babies, you know. And so in order to finish high school and have clothes and stuff to wear, she went to work so I could have some stuff to wear to high school until I could get old enough to go out and work. So, but anyway, she ended up being the baker there. She baked marvelous yeast rolls, sugar cream pie, blueberry muffins. If you ate there, whatever you ate in the bakery line or the dessert line, she furnished it. She then went to the one that they opened down here on South Madison, right where the point is. They opened there for a while. And then when that one shut down, she ended up going to Diamond Chain over here on Kentucky Avenue, and she worked in their kitchen over there for a long time until she got ready to retire. And that brought me to the point of, by that time I had my son, and Kurt was had some medical problems when he was born, and with his stomach, and he couldn't sleep laying down, or he would have projectile vomiting. So pretty much for the first 18 months, we set up and held him, you know, 24 hours around the clock when he was trying to sleep anyway. So when she got off of work, after working an 8-hour shift as a baker at Diamond Chain, she'd come to my house, and she'd set up and hold my child for me for 4, 5, 6 hours while I got sleep. And then she'd go home at 10 o'clock or whatever it was and start the whole cycle over. And she did that for well over probably 6 or 8 months. So not only her love for me, but her love for her grandchild, of which she ended up having 9 grandchildren. And fortunately for my son, or unfortunately, by the time he came along. Most of her other grandchildren had moved out of the city and were out of state. So he got the brunt of her love full time. And the old saying is that, you know, your grandkids can get away with most anything that your kids couldn't. Kurt took an awful liking to screwdrivers. And he took every doorknob in her house apart. Every one, including the screen doors. She thought it was funny. Now, if I'd have done that, that switch would have had to have been about that big around, you know, for punishment. But there again, just an unending source of love, strength, whatever adjective you can put to it. She's been gone 33 years. There's not a week, here I go again, sorry, that goes by that I don't talk to her. And to this day, I still ask for her guidance, her approval on anything that I do that I don't think that I'm doing right. And believe me, there's a lot of that. But she's with me constantly, even though she's been gone. So to all you mothers out there, God love you. You're the greatest things in the world. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Rosie. And now Linda Fox will share.
Hey, I didn't say I was going first.
And I have to follow that.
I know. I couldn't make it through this.
Rosie and I kind of volunteered to do this year. Most everybody kind of turned down the opportunity. I tell you what, I would much rather stand up here and sing than talk.
Yay.
I wasn't sure whether to speak about my mom or about being a mom, so I chose my mom. But it kind of made me thought when I was just scribbling ideas down. Saw an episode of Little House on the Prairie one time where the teacher had all the students write a story about their mom. And on Friday, all the moms were invited to school, and the students were going to stand up there and read what they'd written about their mom. Well, Laura Ingalls got up there, and she was telling about how good her mom was, and worked hard, never complained, cooked all her meals, had sewn new dresses for her and her sister for that particular day. Well, after school, they were out in the schoolyard, and Ma Ingalls wanted to look at Laura's paper. So she looked at it, and she took Laura's hand and marched her back into the school. She gave the paper to the teacher, and she said, "I think you need to see what Laura wrote." So the teacher opened her paper, and all it said was, "Ma is good." And the teacher looked at the paper again, and she looked at Ma, and she said, "I think she needs to work a little on her penmanship," was all that she'd said. So when I was scribbling all this down, I thought, how do you surmise someone's life in just a few minutes? It's hard.
Sure.
Yeah. I'd start one thing, that wouldn't work. And I'd start another thing, and I'd have to stop, blow nose, my eyes. Mom was the fourth of five children. She was born in Ohio. Both of her parents died when she was 6. Both had different forms of cancer. And she was sent to live with an aunt and uncle and a cousin in Toledo. And while she was there, she got rheumatic fever, which left her with a heart murmur. Well, back then, they didn't really know that much about it, so they treated her, as she said, as an invalid. She went to a private school or a special school. She wasn't allowed to run and play, jump rope, ride a bike, or anything like that, because they were just afraid to kill her. Well, she and her cousin would go over to a little friend's house, and she'd run and play and jump rope and ride a bike, and it didn't hurt her at all. And when she was 16, she was sent on an army train full of soldiers to the state of Washington to live with her older sister. Her older sister was 15 years older than she was, already married and had kids, so she went up there and lived with her for a while. And when she was in her 20s, they moved here, and Mom stayed here. Her sister went off somewhere else. And she met my dad. She worked at a drugstore on Monument Circle. And my dad had come in one day and asked her what time she got off work. And she said, "Well, I have to work until such and such." And he said, "I don't care what time you get off work." And he was there waiting for her when she got off work. So they got married, had 3 kids, And I was the baby of the family. We moved on the south side when I was 3 years old. We lived across the street and just half a block down at 46 East String, not too far from me. And Mom started bringing us here Sunday mornings. She'd clean us up the best she could and drag us here, because that's what we figured. And most of the time we came willingly, and other times it was not quite so much. But we were always here. She loved being in the choir, loved being part of the builder's class. And she was kind of one of the pioneers, I guess, at getting the food pantry going. She loved doing that. She was gentle and kind most of the time, but if we disobeyed or looked out, she could smack pretty hard. And talk about switching, I can remember one time I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old, I don't know. Got in trouble, I don't remember why, but I ran. Big mistake. She pulled a little branch off that tree and she just whipped my little legs all the way home. So I never ran after that. One thing Mom could always do, she could make a meal out of nothing. You could look in the cabinet to see kind of what there was for dinner, and it's like, what are we gonna eat? There might be a couple cans of something. Come dinner time, table was set, there was plenty of food for everybody. Where it came from, we never knew. But we never really did go hungry. As I got older, she became my best friend. Being the baby of the family, when the other two were gone, it was just she and I. My dad had already left by that time, and we did everything together. I could just sit and talk forever. We'd just go drive around, go shopping. And I know this sounds kind of awful, but when she was between husbands, between my dad and Jake, she went everywhere with me. We went shopping, I'd call her up, say, well, I'm going to the store, and you'd go. And we were just always together. And it was more like a friendship, like Elizabeth and I have, than a mere mother and a daughter. I feel like I'm like my mother a lot. A lot of people tell me I look just like her. I don't see it, but everybody else does. I love my mother dearly. We never really wanted for anything. When she met Jake and they got married, I think she was truly the happiest she'd ever been in her entire life. I think it was destined for them to be together. They were like two peas in a pod. They were able to go on adventures that she never thought she'd ever be able to do. And he too worked in the food pantry and loved every minute of it, and that's when it was just a little cubby hole next to the stairs. And they would be so proud now to see how big that it has grown. And when he died and we were emptying out their house, there was this one little shelf in the living room. And I didn't want to throw it away. None of the kids needed it. And I thought, I want to put it in the food pantry. They can use it for something. I got a little plaque put on the end of it that says Jake's Shelf. And it's down there to this day. It sits on a table and it's always full of surplus. And so every Tuesday when the pantry's open, I go down there and there's Jake's Shelf. She was loving, she was gentle, and she loved everyone, and everyone loved her. She died August 6th of 2009. She was in the hospital for quite a while at that time, and even a couple of the nurses that when Mom died, they could not go back into her room because they were so upset, and just for the family, but just for the fact that they lost someone that they had fallen in love with. And that was really hard. That was really a hard time. And just one more time. It's like my sister and I the other day, when we could call Mom, she'd know. We had a question, she'd know whatever the answer would be. And just one more time, I would just love to hear her say, I love you too, darling, and kiss me on my little cheek, because Mom was good.